"Are you serious, Gunnery Sergeant?" Colonel Marcus Thorne's voice was a blade cutting through the dry desert air. He gestured with his chin towards the old man standing patiently by the range check-in desk. "You're telling me this gentleman wants to qualify on the M40A6? The disbelief dripped from his words, thick and oily. Raymond Hunt, 81 years old, said nothing. He stood with a stillness that seemed ancient, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, were not on the colonel, but on the distant targets shimmering under the California sun. He looked less like a threat and more like a man who had misplaced his tour bus. "Sir," Gunnery Sergeant Miller began, his own voice tight with a respect the colonel clearly lacked. "Mr. Hunt is a certified civilian marksman. He has all the paperwork. He just requests an hour on lane 4. Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a sound that made several young Marines nearby shift uncomfortably. They were waiting for their own range time, and this unexpected delay was turning into a spectacle. The colonel, a man whose reputation was built on logistics and PowerPoint presentations rather than trigger time, clearly saw the old man as a bureaucratic nuisance and perhaps a personal affront. He thrived on order, on the predictable rhythm of a base running on his schedule. Raymond Hunt was an unwelcome variable. Paperwork. Thorne scoffed, snatching the clipboard from Gunny Miller's hand. He scanned the documents with a theatrical slowness, his lip curling. "This certification is older than half the men on this range. Look at him, Gunny. He can barely stand. You want me to hand him a $200,000 rifle system so he can what? Tell war stories and maybe hit the berm if we're lucky." The colonel stepped closer to Raymond, his polished boots crunching on the gravel. He was a good foot taller, radiating an aura of crisp uniforms and self-importance. Raymond didn't flinch. He simply met the colonel's gaze. In that moment it was unclear who was truly appraising whom. "Sir," Raymond said, his voice a low, calm rumble, not shaky as the colonel might have expected. "I'm just here to fire a string. I won't be a bother." "A bother?" Thorne's voice rose. "This is the United States Marine Corps Advanced Sniper Range, not a county fair shooting gallery. We have active duty personnel who need this time. We have war fighters to train. We don't have time for nostalgic field trips." The circle of onlookers was growing. Young lance corporals and privates fresh from boot camp watched with a mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. They saw a confrontation between a formidable colonel and a frail-looking old man. Their loyalties were with the rank, but their sympathies were starting to drift. Colonel Thorne seemed to feed on the attention. He was performing now, using the old man as a prop in a lesson about military seriousness. He tapped a finger on Raymond's worn, faded canvas shooting jacket. It was a simple, old-fashioned thing, with leather patches at the elbows and shoulder, and it looked out of place amidst the digital camouflage and tactical gear. "What is this supposed to be?" Thorne asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "You pull this out of a museum?" He flicked a small hand-stitched patch on the jacket's breast. The patch was dark green, almost black, with a simple silver thread design that was hard to make out. It was frayed at the edges, a relic from another time. Raymond's eyes briefly dropped to the patch, a flicker of something deep and distant in their blue depths. He said nothing. "I need to see your identification again," the colonel demanded, holding out his hand. "And I want to see your hands. I need to be sure they're steady enough not to be a danger to my Marines." It was a deliberate, calculated humiliation. Raymond slowly, methodically pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. As he opened it, he extended his hands. They were wrinkled, the skin thin over the knuckles, but there was not a tremor in them. They were as steady as granite. He handed over his driver's license. Thorne glanced at it and scoffed. "Raymond Hunt. Well, Raymond Hunt, your day trip is over. I am denying this request on the grounds of safety and operational tempo. Please escort Mr. Hunt off the base, Gunnery Sergeant." Gunny Miller stood frozen. He looked from the colonel's smug face to Raymond's impassive one. The injustice of it was a physical weight. He had seen the old man's paperwork. It was not only valid, it was sponsored by a name so high up the chain of command he had assumed it was a typo. He had brought Raymond here out of a sense of duty, following orders from a superior he had never met. Now he was being ordered to disrespect a man who, for reasons he couldn't explain, commanded a deep and instinctual reverence. The young Marines were murmuring now, their smirks replaced with frowns. They knew when an officer was being a leader, and when he was being a bully. The colonel's eyes narrowed as he looked at the worn patch on Raymond's jacket again, a final sneer on his face. Some forgotten unit, I suppose, trying to relive the glory days. He saw a piece of faded cloth on a dusty jacket. The world seemed to fall away for a moment, the harsh sunlight of the range dissolving into a thick, humid green. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and decay. A much younger Raymond lay perfectly still in the mud of a Vietnamese jungle, the same patch sewn onto his boonie hat. Rain dripped from the leaves above, tracing paths down the barrel of his rifle. He hadn't moved in 18 hours. His spotter, a kid from Ohio named Danny, lay beside him, whispering coordinates. The patch, newly stitched by Danny's mother and sent from home, was a symbol of their two-man team. They called themselves the Spectres, because they were ghosts. They were never seen, only felt. In his mind's eye, Raymond saw the impossible distance to the target, the wind he could feel but not see, and the calm that settled over him as he slowly, gently squeezed the trigger. It was a memory not of glory, but of grim, silent duty. Back on the sun-baked range, Raymond's expression hadn't changed, but Gunny Miller saw the shift in his eyes. He saw the flicker of a fire that had never truly gone out. The colonel's mockery of the patch was the final straw. This was no longer about procedure, it was about desecration. "Colonel, with all due respect," Miller started, but Thorne cut him off. "Are you questioning my order, Gunny?" "No, sir," Miller said, his jaw tight. He gave Raymond an apologetic look. "Sir, if you'll follow me." As he began to lead Raymond away, the old man stopped and turned back to the colonel. "The request was for Lane 4, specifically," Raymond said, his voice even. "It's important." This only enraged Thorne further. The audacity of the old man to persist. "I don't care if you requested the moon. Your request is denied. This range is for warriors, not for grandfathers playing soldier. Get him out of here before I have him cited for trespassing." The humiliation was complete. The crowd of Marines was silent, watching an elder of their tribe being cast out. Gunny Miller felt a hot surge of shame. As he walked Raymond toward the parking lot, his mind raced. The sponsorship, the specific request for Lane 4, the old man's unnerving calm. It didn't add up. He had his orders from the colonel, but he also had a deeper duty to the Corps and to the men who had built it. He made sure Raymond was situated comfortably on a bench in the shade, promising to return with a bottle of water. Then he walked behind the range control tower, pulled out his personal cell phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was one number he kept for absolute emergencies, a direct line to a master sergeant at the base command building, a man who had seen everything and knew everyone. Master Sergeant Davis. He pressed the call button. "Davis," a gruff voice answered. "Master Sergeant, it's Gunny Miller down at the Hathcock Range," he said, keeping his voice low. "Sorry to bother you, sir, but we have a situation." "What is it, Gunny? Did one of your new shooters forget which end the bullet comes out of?" "No, sir. It's Colonel Thorne. He's just ejected a civilian from the range." There was a sigh on the other end. "Thorne is an ass, Miller. We all know it. Why are you calling me about it? File a report." "Sir, it's who he ejected," Miller pressed, his heart pounding. He felt like he was walking a tightrope over a canyon. "The civilian's name is Raymond Hunt." Silence. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was static. Gunny Miller wondered if the call had dropped. Then Master Sergeant Davis's voice came back, but it was completely different. The gruffness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp urgency. "Say that name again, Gunnery Sergeant." "Hunt, sir. Raymond Hunt. Spell it. Hunt." Another pause, this one filled with a tension that Miller could feel through the phone. "Gunny," Davis said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Keep that man there. Do not let him leave the base. Use whatever excuse you have to. I don't care if you have to tell him the general wants to polish his boots. Just keep him there. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Master Sergeant," Miller said, stunned. "Good. Help is on the way." The line went dead. Gunny Miller stared at his phone, a sudden chilling realization dawning on him. Colonel Thorne hadn't just made a mistake. He had kicked a hornet's nest. A very, very old one. Master Sergeant Frank Davis slammed the phone down in its cradle, his face pale. For a man who had spent 30 years in the Marine Corps, from the streets of Fallujah to the mountains of Afghanistan, it took a lot to rattle him. But the name Raymond Hunt was a lightning strike from a clear sky. It wasn't a name you heard, it was a name you read about in dusty classified after-action reports and whispered about in instructor lounges at Quantico. He didn't walk, he ran. He burst from his office, startling a young corporal, and sprinted down the polished hallway of the command building, his footsteps echoing like gunshots. He didn't bother knocking on the base commander's door. He threw it open, making the 2-star general inside look up from his paperwork with a flash of irritation. "Master Sergeant, what is the meaning of this?" General Peterson demanded. "Sir, my apologies, but this is an emergency," Davis said, still breathless. "It's Colonel Thorne, sir, down at the Hathcock Range." The general's expression hardened. What has Thorne done now? "He's thrown a civilian off the range, denied him access." Peterson sighed, exasperated. "Frank, I'm busy. Can't this be handled by the provost marshal? Sir, Davis said, leaning forward and lowering his voice. The civilian's name is Raymond Hunt. The general froze. The pen in his hand stopped moving. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes widening as the name registered. He stared at his master sergeant, searching his face. Raymond Hunt. Are you certain? Gunny Miller just called me from the range. H-U-N-T. It's him, sir. General Peterson's entire demeanor changed. The annoyed administrator vanished, replaced by the warrior. He rose from his chair, his movements suddenly crisp and urgent. He looked at his master sergeant, and for the first time Davis saw a flicker of something that looked like fear in his commander's eyes. Frank, the general said, his voice a low command. Get my vehicle, and get the sergeant major. Now, tell them to skip the sirens. We go quiet. Back at the range, Colonel Thorne was basking in his perceived victory. He had restored order. He had made his point. He paced before the assembled Marines, a swagger in his step. Let that be a lesson for all of you, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent firing line. This is an elite institution. There is no room for sentimentality. There is no room for relics. The standards are the standards for a reason. Raymond Hunt was sitting on the bench where Gunny Miller had left him, sipping from a bottle of water the Gunny had brought. He seemed perfectly content to wait, his gaze still fixed on the distant hills beyond the range. Thorne, not satisfied with his victory, decided he needed one final definitive act. He strode over to Raymond, his shadow falling over the old man. I thought I told you to leave, Thorne said, his voice cold. The gunnery sergeant asked me to wait, Raymond replied calmly. He did he? Thorne sneered. Well, I'm countermanding his request. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to get your ancient bones off my range before I have you cited for trespassing. Perhaps a nice psychological evaluation is in order, thinking you can just walk in here and make demands. He was pushing past the point of no return, driven by an arrogance that had become a runaway train. He was so focused on his own power that he didn't hear the soft crunch of tires on the gravel road behind him. He didn't see the black command vehicles pulling to a stop. He didn't see the doors fly open, but everyone else did. The young Marines, Gunny Miller, the range masters, they all saw it. They saw the general's 2-star flag on the lead vehicle. They saw General Peterson emerge, his face a thundercloud, followed by the base sergeant major, a man whose scowl could curdle milk. They moved with a speed and intensity that signaled a crisis of the highest order. The entire range fell silent. Every Marine, as if moved by a single nerve, snapped to the position of attention. The sudden unified crack of heels coming together was the only sound. Colonel Thorne finally turned, confused by the sudden silence. His jaw went slack, his face drained of all color. He saw the general and his entourage marching towards him, their eyes burning holes in him. He tried to compose himself, to snap a salute, but he was too slow, too late. General Peterson walked right past him. He didn't spare him a glance, as if the colonel was nothing more than a piece of furniture. He marched directly to the bench where Raymond Hunt was slowly getting to his feet. The general stopped a foot in front of the old man, who now stood straight, the frailty gone, replaced by an undeniable dignity. Then the 2-star general did something that sent a shockwave through the assembled crowd. He snapped to the sharpest, most profound salute of his career. It was a salute of utter, unconditional respect. Mr. Hunt, General Peterson's voice boomed, full of a deference no one had ever heard from him before. It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the welcome you have received. Raymond simply nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes, and returned a slow, respectful nod of his own. The crowd of young Marines stared, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. A 2-star general saluting a civilian. Colonel Thorne looked like he had been turned to stone. The general turned to face the stunned audience. His eyes swept over the young Marines, the NCOs, and finally settled on Colonel Thorne with the force of a physical blow. For those of you who don't know, the general began, his voice ringing with authority, you have been standing in the presence of a legend. This is Raymond the Ghost Hunt. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. The Ghost. It was a name from Marine Corps lore, a sniper who had become a myth in the jungles of Vietnam, a man credited with shots that were technically impossible, who held records set with an antique rifle that modern science said were unbreakable. They were stories told to inspire young snipers, a benchmark of excellence that no one ever expected to actually meet. Mr. Hunt is not here to qualify, the general continued, his voice laced with ice as he looked at Thorne. He is here, as he has been on this day for the past 50 years, to honor the memory of his spotter, Corporal Daniel Ames, who was killed in action on this date in 1971. He does so by firing a single 10-shot string on Lane 4, the lane they always trained on together. It is a tradition that was approved by the Commandant of the Marine Corps himself decades ago. A tradition, Colonel, that you would know about if you spent half as much time reading the history of this corps as you do your own fitness reports. The public humiliation of Colonel Thorne was absolute and breathtaking. The young Marines now looked at Raymond with a new understanding, with awe. They weren't looking at an old man anymore. They were looking at a ghost, a living monument to their own highest ideals. They saw the worn jacket not as a relic but as a holy vestment. They saw the frayed patch and understood it was a medal far more valuable than anything the military could officially bestow. The general then turned his full undivided attention to the colonel. The rebuke was not loud, but it was devastating in its precision. Colonel Thorne, your command of this range is hereby revoked. You will surrender it to Gunnery Sergeant Miller for the remainder of the day. You and I will have a conversation in my office at 1600 hours. I suggest you spend the intervening time reflecting on the Marine Corps values of honor, courage, and commitment, as you have displayed none of them today. You are dismissed. Thorne, his face ashen, could only manage a choked, "Yes, sir." He turned and walked away, his career in tatters, the eyes of every Marine on him like daggers. Then, in the silence that followed, Raymond Hunt finally spoke. He looked at the young Marines, then at the general. His voice was not triumphant, but soft and full of a quiet wisdom. "General, the boy just made a mistake," he said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the retreating colonel. "He sees the uniform, not the man. It's an easy mistake to make these days." He turned his gaze to the young Marines. "Remember this," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected weight. "The uniform changes, the weapons get better, the enemy has a different face, but respect, that's the bedrock. It's timeless. Every person you meet, in or out of this corps, is carrying a history you know nothing about. It's better to assume it's a heavy one." The general nodded, humbled by the old man's grace. He then noticed the small frayed patch on Raymond's jacket. Is that an original Spectre team patch, sir?" the general asked, his voice filled with a historian's reverence. Raymond just touched it gently with his fingertips. "Danny's mom made two. One for him, one for me." The scene dissolved again, not to the jungle this time, but to a dusty, sun-drenched firebase. A young Danny, all smiles and freckles, pressed the patch into a young Raymond's hand. "There," he'd said, grinning. "Now it's official. We're ghosts, Ray. They'll never see us coming." The patch wasn't a trophy of war. It was a promise between brothers, a memorial he had carried over his heart for half a century. The fallout for Colonel Thorne was swift and silent. He was not publicly reprimanded. The Marine Corps preferred to handle such matters internally. But a week later, his name was on a transfer list. His new assignment was a windowless office in the Pentagon basement, analyzing supply chain logistics for the commissary system. It was a career-ending move, a slow and quiet exile. In his place, General Peterson mandated a new training module for all personnel on base, focused on veteran relations and the institutional memory of the Corps. The first lesson was titled, "The Ghost of Hathcock Range," and it told the story of Raymond Hunt. A few months later, Marcus Thorne, now in civilian clothes, was in a local garden center. He was looking at bags of fertilizer, his mind a million miles away, when he saw a familiar figure by the tomato plants. It was Raymond Hunt, inspecting a small seedling with a gentle focus. Thorne's first instinct was to turn and walk away, to avoid the source of his profound humiliation. But the old man's words on the range echoed in his head. "It's what you do next that defines you." He took a deep breath and walked over. Raymond looked up as he approached, his blue eyes calm and recognizing. There was no anger in them, no hint of triumph. "Mr. Hunt," Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to say, I was wrong." It was all he could manage, but it was enough. Raymond looked at him for a long moment, then a small, sad smile touched his lips. He nodded. "We all are. Sometimes, son," he said. He looked down at the seedling in his hand. "The trick is to learn, to grow something better in the soil you're given." He offered Thorne his free hand. It was calloused and strong. After a moment's hesitation, Thorne shook it. The final scene is not on a firing range. It's in Raymond's quiet backyard. He is on his knees, planting tomatoes in the rich soil. The old canvas shooting jacket hangs on a hook by the back door. Inside, on his nightstand, sits the worn, frayed Spectre patch, a silent, humble testament to a promise kept. He has found his peace not in the echo of the rifle, but in the silence of a well-tended garden, the unassuming hero once more. The story of Raymond Hunt is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest, most unassuming forms. If you were moved by his story of quiet valor, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of courage and respect.